I think we left off after positive and normative economic statements, and the next thing is economics is a social science. Social science as contrasted with a natural science. Natural sciences really came first, studying the birds, bees, flowers, trees, things external to us. When we're talking about a social science, we're talking about the study of human behavior. But it's still science, and science is an attempt to gain knowledge through a very structured and objective sequence. So it's a very objective and structured sequence. That's what we mean by that. We'll be looking at the scientific steps here in just a little bit. But science tries very hard to create objective arguments or a theory in support of what we call normative conclusions. We have to know what the data is, how it works in order to figure out what we should do in particular situations, and what kind of economic order we should have. So let's talk a little bit more about science here. And I want to bring in the presuppositions of doing science, and this will, hopefully I can keep this section to about 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to break it into another shorter section. We went about 40-some minutes last time, and I'd like to cut those in half at least. There is a statement in one of the editions of this text that says, if you don't know the assumptions, then you don't know the theory. If you don't know the assumptions, then you don't know the theory. Now, a more academically precise word for assumption would be this word presupposition. Presupposition. So what are the presuppositions of doing science? Now, when we're talking about this word called presuppositions, we're talking about before, supposing, or whatever it is that we are supposing to be the case. So presuppositions are the beliefs that we hold that are so fundamental that we don't even question them. We assume them to be true. And again, if you don't know the assumptions, then you can't know the theory. So what are these presuppositions of doing science? Now, by the way, presuppositions is a pretty academically high-level term. If we were in a psychology class and we're talking about how do people know things or claim to know things, then they would be using a term called perception set. So like a big grid, and they put all these different ideas of things in this different grid, and children build this grid of hot, cold, big, small, daddy, mommy, and they got a grid to put everything in to make sense out of their world. In psychology classes they call it a perception set, but in the common vernacular it's called a worldview, and a worldview is the framework through the mental framework through which we view all the data, and we identify, describe, and interpret all the data. So I'm going to talk about that. Now, just to give you one more illustration here about presuppositions and how it influences our thinking. Think of a presupposition, or the presuppositions that we hold, the same way you would think of a foundation of a building. If you walk up to a building, especially a tall building, and it's not wobbling, and it's not moving, and it's not falling over, then we know it has to have a pretty deep and stable foundation. If it was just sitting on the ground, freeze-thaw action is going to move it all over the place. But you can't see the foundation, but we know it's there. It has to be there, or that building couldn't stay upright for very long. Presuppositions are the same way. You can't see them. We don't usually debate them. Everybody just assumes that they're true. But everything else depends upon those presuppositions. So they're kind of invisible. Most people do not want to talk about them. They just want to assume that they exist, but realize that people have different presuppositions, and that determines how we interpret the data that comes in through our senses. So let me just give you some common sense presuppositions. And again, everything that we claim to know, everything that we believe to be true and everything that we claim to know is based upon these presuppositions. And the difficult thing about presuppositions is that they cannot be scientifically proven. You cannot prove a presupposition. A presupposition is something you have to have in order to build any knowledge on it. So it's the most deepest level of what we claim to build our foundation of knowledge or epistemology on. So here's a common sense presupposition. In other words, you have to have these presuppositions in order to do science at all. And one is that the universe is rational, not chaotic. What? Yeah, I said something that we have to presuppose, that we have to say is true before we actually start collecting data and going through a scientific process, is that the universe around us is rational. It's not chaotic. It's not meaningless. It's not totally random. If it's totally random, you can't build a model for something that's totally random. So we start off, we don't usually say this. We just usually go out and start collecting data. Well, why do we collect data if it is going to be absolutely and totally different every time we collect the data? If it's totally random, then you can't make any sense out of it because there's no sense to be made out of it. Do you catch that? You with me here? And that's just a presupposition. Other presuppositions that would kind of draw out of that is, do the laws of logic actually exist? We presuppose that they do. But can we prove that? How would we go about proving that the laws of logic exist? Something like a law of logic, a basic one, is A is not non-A. They're different. When it comes to these presuppositions, we could also mention that our mind, we presuppose that our mind is rational and that it correlates with the external pattern of the world. In other words, that there's order out there. We just don't understand how it works yet, but we also have to presuppose that our mind is orderly and there is a correlation between the way we think inside our mind, I didn't say our brain, inside our mind, and the way the things are out there. Now, why am I going this direction? Well, we said that economics is a science, and the natural sciences were very, very, very good at helping us gain knowledge about the world around us. If we say we know something scientifically, it means that it doesn't matter what continent you're on, it doesn't matter what day of the week it is, it doesn't matter what your religious beliefs are. You know, if you put an acid and a base together, you're going to get a violent reaction. It doesn't matter what your heritage is, or whether you're male or female, or if you're in a mountain, or if you're in a submarine, or if you're on your moon. It doesn't matter. Those things will happen. That's what we tend to mean when we're talking about something that's scientifically true, or that we know something scientifically. Let me mention two more presuppositions that are not of the common sense variety, but they're more of the philosophically based scientific presupposition. And that's called the inductive principle, number one, and the idea of sequence versus causality. Is Russell with one L or two? It's two L's. There we go. Bertrand Russell. Okay. First, let's talk about a presupposition, something that we believe to be true. We can't prove it, but we believe to be true, and it's got to be true or we can't do science at all, and that's called the inductive principle. Remember last time we said if this is the present, that was the past, and this is the future? Didn't we do something like that last time? We were talking about marginality. The inductive principle says that the cause and effect patterns of the past, over here in the past, will continue into the future. The inductive principle says that the cause and effect patterns of the past, he said this causes that will continue into the future. Why do we have to know that? Or why do we have to believe that? Well, if we put an acid and base together on Monday and you get a violent reaction. We do it on Tuesday, you get a violent reaction. On Wednesday, it gets a violent reaction. What do we think is going to happen on Thursday, Friday, Saturday? The same thing. If it happens in January, it will probably happen in February. And so if that happens over and over and over in the past, we believe that that same cause and effect pattern will happen and continue into the future. If it doesn't, why do science? Because we're trying to figure out how the world works, and if it only works that way up through the year 2015, but it doesn't work that way after 2015, well then that's no good. We want to know something that's going to keep on lasting. So we have to believe in the inductive principle. Did you catch that? There's no way we can prove it. We just have to assume, we have to believe that it's true in order to do science at all. Now, the name I put with that inductive principle was an American philosopher by the name of Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell. And he might not like me formulating this way, but basically what I'm saying is something that's very counterintuitive, that our scientific knowledge is based not on facts themselves, but based upon faith, a belief in the assumptions behind the science that we're doing. So this probably wouldn't wash very well with a lot of people, but science is based upon faith rather than facts. In fact, these faith assertions, I'm saying, are presuppositions, and one of which is the inductive principle. We have to believe the inductive principle is true, or we can't do science, because there would be no such thing as scientific knowledge as we know it. By the way, when I say faith, I really, a synonym would be belief, but really a better synonym would be an allegiance to an idea. So allegiance would probably be a good way. So when I'm saying that, it sounds like I'm saying some sort of religious thing, that science is based upon faith, not facts. But I'm just trying to make the principle that state the principle that all presuppositions cannot be proven by definition of what a presupposition is. If we can prove a presupposition is true, we have to prove it by something that's more fundamental than that, and whatever is underneath that can't be whatever this is can't be a presupposition if we're proving it on the basis of something that's underneath that, something that's underneath that. So whatever that base is, we're calling that presuppositions. Now, a second presupposition is what David Hume talked about, and that's the difference between sequence and causality. Sequence in comparison to causality. If I was to ask you, do you think the sun's going to come up tomorrow? Any nods on that? Yeah, I think the sun's going to come up tomorrow. And if I ask, well, why do you think the sun's going to come up tomorrow? Because it's just a law. There's a law someplace that the sun has to come up every day. Isn't there a law out there someplace that says the sun has to come up every day? Is there a law out there like that? No, there's not a law out there. So I guess, how do we know it's going to come up if there's no law to make it come up? Pardon? The earth is spinning. The sun's going to come up because the earth is spinning. Do you see the earth spinning? Does anybody see the earth spinning? If you're out there in a spaceship and the earth is going around, which is moving? Which is the reference point and which is moving? Academic question. Don't really go for that one. You have to have some fixed reference point to say that something else is moving. Most students would say, well, I believe the sun's going to come up tomorrow because that's what happened every day of my life. So I think it's going to happen tomorrow too. And if I asked my parents, I bet they would say that the sun came up every day in their life too. And probably their grandparents, and I could probably go back in some history books and probably go back a couple thousand years, and it's always happened that way. So statistically, probability, that's going to happen. This cause and effect of the past is going to come into the future. That's the inductive principle. Let me tell you just a little bit of a story about why there's a difference between these two and the presuppositions of why it's important. When my children were growing up, one of the things that my wife wanted them to do was to learn how to take care of animals, take some responsibility and that sort of stuff. So we would buy these little peeps in the spring. They'd come in the mail, and then we would open up the box and put a heat lamp over it and some cornmeal and some water and that sort of stuff, and they would get bigger through the months. And when it got warmer out, we could put them outside inside a cage and that sort of thing, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. And pretty soon I noticed that there were some roosters in there, and the roosters began to crow. You can tell the roosters from the hens, they don't crow. And I noticed that it would be pitch black, the rooster would crow, and right after that, shortly after that, the sun would come up. And I saw that, or I heard that, over and over and over and over again. And what if I said to you, let's see, it's pitch black, the rooster crows, and the sun comes up. And I said, oh, I've been taking this data. I've got a little notepad here, and every day I've noticed that it's pitch black, rooster crows, sun comes up. I think that I've just proven that crowing roosters causes the sun to come up, because it happens that way every single time. Dark, roosters crow, sun comes up. Now what am I saying here? I'm saying that, you caught it, sequence, darkness, rooster crowing, sun come up, is not the same thing as causality. It's not the same thing as causality. Let me back up and say this little story one more time. These chickens, when they're growing up, it's dark out, rooster crows, sun comes up, and then the back door slams, and out comes one of my little kids, and they go, here, chickie, 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 and they feed the little chickens, and you run over there, and they get fed every day. Happens to those chickens every single day of their life. Sometime toward the end of the summer, darkness, rooster crowing, sun comes up, back door slams, someone comes out and says, here, chickie, chickie, chickie. And what is that chicken expecting? Food, just like every other single day in that chicken's life. Only on this particular day, it's Papa San who's coming out, here, chickie, chickie, chickie. Where's a nice rooster to get some food here? Is that going to be a good day for that rooster with my hatchet in my hand? Just because that happened in that chicken's life every single day of their life, does that prove that it's going to be a good day today? Come on. Does it prove that it's going to be a good day for that chicken today when I'm looking for chicken dinner? No, it doesn't. So simply because the sun has come up every single day, does that prove that it's going to come up tomorrow? No, it doesn't prove it. It doesn't prove it scientifically any more than that chicken knows that it's going to be a good day for them either. Now, so I'm saying that this idea of a belief in causality, we can see the sequence. Darkness, chicken, rooster crowing, sun comes up, back door slams, it's breakfast time. We can see sequence, but we cannot see causality. We can only believe, presuppose that there is such a thing as causality. Let me give you one more quick illustration, and we're going to move on to something different here that I want to get to. I keep losing my place here. Oh, there I am. I found where I'm at. Okay. If I drop this, if I'm good, I can catch it every once in a while, but I'm not always that good that I can catch it every time. What's going on here? What are you seeing here? I knew I was going to do this sooner or later. What's going on? What do you see? What do you see? I'm dropping a pin and catching it. Yes. Do you see anything else? What's going on when I drop that pin and I catch it? Gravity. Do you see gravity? No, all you see is a pin dropping. You don't see gravity. Gravity can't be seen. My point is that what we call gravity is a description of a phenomena, what's going on behind the scenes when I drop this. When I drop this thing, there's something we call gravity that's pulling it down, if I can catch this, down. My point here is that the causal factor, the causality, we give the name gravity. But we can't see gravity. We can see the sequence of me raising it, opening my hand, dropping it, and it coming down. We can see that sequence. But when we try to explain the cause of that sequence, now we're talking about causality, and causality is not something we can see. Causality is something that we believe must be true in order to explain what we see. Okay? How it works? So we're talking about, let's say you go to a play. You go to a play, you sit down, and all of a sudden the curtain opens and there's all this furniture and these people come out and they're dressed funny and they go through all these shenanigans and there's a plot and then some music comes up and the lights change and all that sort of stuff. What do you presuppose? In order for that to happen, what must you presuppose? Would it be rational to presuppose that you sat down there and somebody just randomly opened the curtain and there just happened to be furniture there and people just walked out there and they just ad-libbed the whole thing? Would you assume that? It probably would be a very good play if you did. What you're assuming is that, no, somebody sat down and they thought about it. They came up with a script, and then somebody made the costumes, and somebody placed it, and then they rehearsed, and they did all things. Otherwise, it wouldn't be that way. So what we're presupposing is that there was a script writer, and that there was some actors who memorized their scripts, and there was somebody who was controlling the curtain. We didn't see any of that. We didn't see any of that. But we believe it's true, or we couldn't account for what we see. Okay, talking about the presuppositions of science. And I have to say that this is usually a very emotionally disturbing thing for many students, this idea of presuppositions and these faith-based, belief-based foundations of science. Because when we talk about a person's presuppositions, it gets a bit personally scary. Psychologists, I mentioned before, they use the term perception set. Psychologists say that people only change their presuppositions if they encounter one of three things in life. In other words, if you had to sit down and say, okay, what's it all about, Alfie? What is life all about? What's the bottom line? What is going on around here? What's the most fundamental thing of why? Kids like to do that. They go to the parents and say, why? Why is the sky blue? Why? Why? They ask strange things sometimes. It's very hard to answer sometimes. Why? Now, once you go there, you go about, well, let me see. Why is the sky blue? Well, because the sun shines the light and there's this electromagnetic spectrum of different frequencies, and the different frequencies give off different colors, and so when it comes through the sky, it filters out some and only reflects through some, and only the blue wavelengths come through, and so we see the blue wavelengths. And the kid says, why? I just told you why. Why does the blue come through? Because it's like a prism, you know, you shine light into a prism and it spreads it out and you can see the blue and the other colors go the other direction and the other colors bounce off. Why? Once you get 3 whys deep, most parents are out of gas. I mean, that's it. We're over. Next lesson, whatever. When we say these sorts of presupposition things, it goes the same way with us adults. When we're born, based upon our culture and the way we're raised and our parents and their particular views, we pick up our presuppositions the same way people pick up a cold. We pick it up from the people that are around us. We don't think it through. We don't question it. We just say, they're telling me how the world works. I guess that's good. And we tend to believe it, and we pick up our presuppositions that way. And our presuppositions are the base upon which we know anything else. So if we're born with presuppositional glasses that are pink, if I had pink presuppositional glasses, then everything I see is interpreted through my presuppositional grid of pink eyeglasses. And no offense, but you would look kind of pink. But if somebody else from a different culture was having a blue set of cultural presuppositional eyeglasses, he's looking at the same gentleman, he'd say, no, he doesn't look pink, he looks blue. He's blue, all right. Okay? So when we're talking about he's pink, he's blue, he's pink, we're not talking about the thing or person themselves. We're talking about how that person is perceived and how we interpret the data. Data does not interpret itself. Science doesn't interpret itself. We have to interpret the data, and the only way we can interpret the data is through our presuppositional grid. The reason I'm going there, well, one reason I'm going there, is that when we go to this place that most people just do not want to go there, of questioning our own presuppositions, clergy know that if they go to a hospital to talk to people who are likely in a near-death situation, they've got an audience of people who really do want to talk about the ultimate value of life and what's it all about, Alfie. They're in the market for that kind of discussion where normally, hey, I've got a meeting, I got to make some money, I got a car payment, I'm going to a kid's baseball game, I got more things, important things to do than talk about the meaning of life. Okay? So the psychologists say that a person will question their presuppositions on a near-death experience, the death of a spouse, or a religious conversion. Those are the only times that people will ever question their own presuppositions, their own fundamental grid for how they interpret the data. So when you're talking to someone and you show them or you experience the very same data, two people can walk away with two completely different interpretations of what they saw based upon their presuppositional grid of how they interpreted that particular data. Now, those are what I call the presuppositions of doing science, and these are two academic principles that we have to believe in order to do science, but we can't prove them. Now let's talk about what we actually do. Most people don't think about their presuppositions. They don't even think they have any presuppositions. They don't see any presuppositions. They don't see any foundation for what they're building on. They just assume it's there because everybody else seems to think that it's there too. So now let's talk about economic theory and the scientific method. I'm going to call this the 3-step versus the 4-step method of doing science. The first thing we do as a scientist is we observe. I could say in order to be a scientist, what you need is a white smock and some horn-rimmed glasses and a little plastic pen holder and walk around with a clipboard, and now you're an official scientist or something. But that's a little bit not quite right. And you don't need that paraphernalia to do science. But what you do have to do is observe. Another way of saying that is we're going to use our 5 senses. And by the way, there's another presupposition. How do we get any data at all? We have to get our data through our senses, through our eyes, nose, taste, ears, hands, touch. And does any of that stuff, all those signals have to be converted into some electromechanical, chemical pulses that go through our nervous system that wind up being some sort of synapses going off in our brain somewhere? Do those synapses going off in our brain have any correlation at all to what's outside our senses? Well, we believe that they do. That's, again, another one of those nasty presuppositions that just keep popping up, that we just believe that when I touch something solid, that this sense perception here actually that's going off in my mind, there's really a connection between something that's going on in my mind with what's going on with my hand in this table here. But, aside, we observe, we collect data. Now, data is absolutely meaningless. It has no meaning at all. It's just data. So how do we turn this collection of data, Monday I saw this, Tuesday I saw that, Wednesday I saw the other thing, how do we turn that into some sort of scientific knowledge? Well, the next thing that we have to do is we have to take that data and create a theory. Create a theory. In other words, we have to, with our mind, take the data and organize it into some sort of logical structure. Some sort of logical structure. Now notice that's a intellectual, mental sort of activity. Now once we have that theory where we collect this data and we structure it and we put it in some sort of order, and we say, oh, okay, well then I think there's causality here, and I think that when this happens, that rolling ball runs into this thing, it hits that, and then it hits that firing pin, and then it hits the firing pin of the bullet, and the bullet goes out the barrel, and the barrel points the bullet to the wall, and it hits the target. I think that's this causes that, which causes this, which causes that. I believe that there's causality there between this and that. Well, how do we know? Well, the next step is we have to test it. We have to test it. A more scientific word for that would be predicate. We have to predicate. We have to forecast. To predicate means we're going to predict the future. We're going to predict the future. So I think, let's say that I'm in the golf course groundskeeping business, and my specialty is to grow the greens around the hole where they hit the little ball. And I have a theory that in order for grass to grow, the temperature has to be above freezing. Well, above freezing or the grass doesn't grow. I also have a theory that the ground has to be moist. There has to be water there for it to grow, for the seeds to grow. And there has to be sunlight for it to grow. And I also noticed that wherever there's grass, there's automobiles. There's some automobiles somewhere around wherever there's grass. Did you ever notice that? Near sidewalks or highways or something? And so my theory is in order for grass to grow, you got to have sunlight. It's got to be above freezing. You got to have some water, right? Some dirt there. And you got to have some automobiles around. Because grass doesn't grow with automobiles, because you always see automobiles with grass. I'm looking out, I see some grass out there. The grass, and over there's a parking lot every single time. You go to somebody's house, they got a grass front yard. What's in front of the front yard? A street. What's on the street? Cars. I mean, I'm just looking around and saying, what is associated with grass? What's needed for grass to grow? I think it's automobiles and warm temperatures and sunlight and water, rain, and all those sorts of things. So how do I test my theory? Well, I'll get one test plot here, and I'll give it everything except water. I'll give it temperature and warm soil and sunlight and all that sort of stuff, and I go, if it never gets any water, I guess it doesn't grow, so I guess water is one of the essential elements to get my grass to grow. And what about sunlight? I do everything except I cover it with a dark tarp so that it doesn't get any sunlight, and nope, nothing grows, it dies out. I guess I absolutely have to have sunlight. And so I said, I also have to have cars, right? So I do one of these, and I take all the cars away, and I'd grow it in the woods, and it comes up. Oh, what have I proven? I thought I needed cars, but I guess I don't need cars because I have tested it. Now, these 3 steps are called passive science. passive science. We're trying to figure out how the world works. How does the world work? So we observe, we come up with a theory, and the theory is not something that we find under a flat rock. A theory is a belief in causality, that there's order in it, and if we're correct about the order of things, well, then we can predict how things are going to turn out. We can predict that, no, you don't need cars around to grow grass. But yes, you can predict that you do need water, you do need sunlight, you need above freezing temperatures, or that grass is not going to grow. Now that's a scientific three-step. And in the natural sciences, we don't want to really stop there. If we're in the grass growing business, yes, we do want to observe the different kinds of grass and how they grow, and we want to have a theory of how it grows, and it's good to test things, but we don't make money knowing how things work. We make money by causing things to work the way we want them to work. So the next step is we don't want to just predict the future. We want to, class, control the future. Now that's how we get something done. That's how we make money. That's how we make life turn out the way we want it to turn out. Why do we go through all this stuff of being able to accurately predict stuff? So that we can actually control stuff. Now, in the natural sciences, we have been extremely successful with the scientific method. Extremely successful. On my first day on campus here, I walked into the library. No, I walked into the bookstore, and there was a book there by B.F. Skinner. He was a Harvard psychologist, and the title of his popular book was Beyond Freedom and Dignity. Beyond Freedom and Dignity. I go, that's interesting. And what did he mean in that book? Well, he was saying we now live in a scientific age. We now know how the world works. And he said we need to take what we can do in the natural sciences, and we should do that in the social sciences. Natural sciences is about the birds, bees, flowers, trees. Social sciences, like economics, are about how people behave, people's behavior. So we don't want to just observe people and collect data. We just don't want to have a theory about how people interact and how they relate to one another. We just don't want to be able to accurately predict how they behave. We want to be able to control how they behave. So if I was in a retail marketing situation, I would want to make sure that if I'm selling potato chips, that my brand of potato chips is not up here, not down here, it's right about here. Because we believe that people tend to follow the path of least resistance, just like water coming down a mountain. People follow the path of least resistance, so if they're going to get a bag of potato chips, they usually buy the one that's right about here. Because their arm swing, yep, puts it right in the bag. They don't want to climb up there and get this one. They don't want to lean down and get this one. They want to get the one that's right here. So we're going to sell more if we put it right here. Now, we don't want to just predict that about the future and be accurate. I want to put mine there so I get more sales. I want to control people. So B.F. Skinner was talking about we got to get past this idea that people are different than the rest of creation or the rest of the order. I call it creation because that's my background. Are different than the rest of the environment. So we've got to get past the idea that there is such a thing as human freedom and human dignity, because people are simply the result of their upbringing and their training, or they're a result of their genes. Why do you like chocolate? Because your mommy fed you a little chocolate when you're a kid and you got a taste for it, and that's why you just love chocolate. That's one theory. Or it could be in your genes. You just got a match for chocolate, and you just kind of, the first time you taste it, you just love first sight. We just love this chocolate. The two major theories of why people do what they do. It's either programmed in their genes or they're conditioned. But either way, they are behavioral. They're beings that we can shape. How do we make them quit stealing? Well, we train them to be different. Or, I don't know, we could give them shock treatments and mess up all their genetic components or something. But the point is, beyond freedom and dignity, we need to control people the same way that we can control birds and bees and animals and trees and plastics and all that sort of stuff. Now, the reason I'm bringing that up is because to a certain extent we can. To a certain extent we can, but should we go there? When we go from passive science to active science, to actively changing the environment around us, people like B.F. Skinner says, how do I keep the kid from running out in the street? I tell them, don't run in the street. Stay out of the street. They still run out into the street. How can I keep the kid from running out in the street? Well, one way is when every child is born, you put a little electronic probe right about here in the back of their head, and you got this little thing that you carry around with you. Johnny, don't go on the street. Johnny, come back. Come back, Johnny. I'm telling you, come back. Ooh, that hurt. I told you don't go out in the street. I'm going to the street anyway. No, Johnny, come back. Well, they do it with dogs, don't they? Don't they? Well, dogs, kids, it's just, who was the dog psychologist? Pavlov, who says, he, absent-minded professor, couldn't keep his dogs alive, and so he put up the buzzer system to keep them alive and know when to water them, feed them, all that sort of stuff, and all of a sudden the buzzer went off and the dog started salivating. Did the dog consciously think, oh, it's time to salivate? No, they were just conditioned. And so we're saying, well, people are the same way. They're conditioned, so we just got to condition them to do what we want. My point is not that we cannot do that with other people. My point is that we ought not do that with other people. We ought not use scientific means to subtly brainwash people or subtly cause them to act in ways that they're being manipulated, but they do not know that they are being manipulated. So when we're talking about this concept of being able to control the economy, macroeconomic control of the economy, it will boil down to controlling people's belief and behavior, or we cannot control the outcome of the economy. So I'm drawing this line here, so that you can see there's a red flag here when we do macroeconomics. Not that we can't, not that we don't have the scientific expertise that can manipulate people. If you want to do a gruesome study on that, just Google MK Ultra and all the studies that the Defense Department has done from the 1950s on Manchurian candidate sort of people and mind control and split personalities. Humankind can do amazing things with other people. I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying, should we? Is that the society that we want to live in? I'm making this distinction because what we do in the natural sciences, observe, theory, test, and control with rocks and birds and bees, and even dogs, and even cattle and horses. I personally don't have a problem with that. But when we're talking about one person controlling a different person, I hope all sorts of red flags come up into your mind when we do that. Now, we'll go into the next section in a second here. We'll be right back.